Under cliffs carved out by the elements, the ancient Anasazi built their homes into the mountain, protected by the earth itself. Living in harmony with nature was a question of survival. The people who lived here knew that every meal they ate, every tool they used was a gift from the earth. Today we've lost sight of that connection. We forget the technology itself depends on earth systems and must function within them. At any level of technology, we must ask the question, is this way of life sustainable? For the Anasazi, the answer was no. Without planning, as population increased, basic resources, trees, water, and soil were depleted. In crisis, they had to abandon a land that could no longer support them. And so they moved on and disappeared. Like many cultures that have come and gone, we're still in the habit of using our resources for short-term gains and then moving on. Until now, late in this century. You see, until now, there's always been new terrain, a new river, a new forest, a new part of the globe to track down and map out and develop. But the more important maps are in our heads. And this program is about changing those maps. It's about changing our own personal attitudes about the environment. It's about waste and energy. It's about pollution. And it's about living in harmony with the only world we have. We know where we are on a map of a city, state, or nation, but do we know where we stand within the more complicated network that makes up the living planet? Do we know, for instance, how the loss of biodiversity or the extinction of a species will affect us? What you just saw is how nature works. Every plant, mineral, and animal contributes to the whole. Each plays a part in the larger organism we call Earth. And in the planet's natural cycles, nothing is wasted. Except here. This is the species that attempts to live outside of nature's cycles. This is the species that uses more than it needs. This is the species that wastes. And we waste in greater concentrations than natural processes can remove. When the wastes build up or combine to the point where they begin to threaten life, we call it pollution. At this level of technology, most of the time it has not been a big problem. But technology changes. Now pollution becomes very noticeable, and our pollution has begun to dominate the natural world. It starts to kill it. In 1963, marine biologist Rachel Carson noticed that when spring came, the early mornings were strangely silent, where they had once been filled with the songs of birds. What she uncovered was the connection between a broken bird's egg and the spraying of pesticides. Her book, Silent Spring, changed the mental maps of millions of people.
Save our Earth! Save our Earth!
Where the people lead, leaders follow. Between 1970 and today, Congress passed over 10 major environmental statutes designed to clean up the mess we had made, to clean the air and the water, to control toxic chemicals, pesticides, and hazardous wastes, and to protect our biodiversity. We built wastewater treatment facilities. We set air emission standards. For instance, there's 87% less lead in our air today than in 1970. Hundreds of billions of dollars were spent on cleanup activities between 1970 and 1990, and our programs worked. But we didn't quite get the message. Because there's something missing when we try to protect the environment just by making laws to control the pollution we're putting out. Let me show you what I mean. That's pollution. That's pollution control. It's hard, it's messy, can be expensive, sometimes it doesn't work out right, much of the time retrieval is impossible. Where we want to go, where we have to go, is toward an economy that's in harmony with nature, an economy that imitates nature, that uses up its own waste, an economy that's as creative in reusing as it is in producing. In short, an economy based on the idea of pollution prevention. What's the first step? Changing our mental maps. If we don't generate it in the first place,
If we don't put it in the water or the air or the soil, if we don't put it in a garbage can on its way to a landfill, we save raw materials, energy, and tax dollars, not to mention life. Of course, we do have to change our attitudes, our behavior, and our way of looking at the world. That's pollution prevention. And as Benjamin Franklin said, an ounce of prevention
is worth a pound of cure.
Any industry affected vigorously opposed it.
This hands-off attitude prevailed among businessmen from the turn of the century on. For the pioneers of American industry, smoke meant money. The furnaces that fired our factories and mills were symbols of the energy that built America. So it wasn't surprising during the early years of the environmental movement in this country, industry was afraid that what environmentalists really wanted was to shut down the furnaces themselves. Since shutting down the plants was usually out of the question, what we did was add expensive end-of-pipe devices to treat pollution on its way to the environment. Hundreds of billions of dollars were spent on this. Now, these devices work well, but they are expensive to buy, operate, and eventually replace. The future of industry lies in an entirely different direction. Instead of accepting production as inherently dirty, something we have to clean up after, we have to redesign production itself so that it's inherently clean.
We can't continue to spend our capital, which is all of our air, water, soil, forest, minerals, ocean. Pretty soon we run out of capital. If a corporation does that, they go bankrupt.
Companies that refuse to redesign often don't take into account the cost of polluting. If their bottom line reflected not only the cost of materials, equipment, and employees, but also the often hidden cost of polluting byproducts in health, liability, and disposal, they'd find it makes economic sense to invent new production strategies.
Nobody's denying it's an issue anymore.
The underlying principle is simple: sustainable growth. We can take no more from the environment in terms of resources than the environment can sustain. The hard question we have to ask ourselves is whether our way of life is purchased at too dear a price. If we are indeed using up our environmental capital at an alarming rate, spending it like income, then we are dissipating our natural assets. We are living in environmental debt.
If we get creative, recycling of industrial and consumer waste can go far beyond curbside programs and recycling centers. This process, pioneered by InCycle, recovers metals from liquid waste that were once disposed of into the environment. Using this technology, it is possible to mine metal out of wastewater instead of mining new ores from the earth. Let's face it, we rely on millions of products and don't think much about where they come from. All products, no matter how high-tech, are earth-based, but behind them are manufacturing processes that can generate lots of pollution. We aren't going to give up these products. What we need to do is take another look at our production practices and find better ways to make these products. But can we, in fact, redesign production so that it is inherently clean? The answer is yes. New plants like the one built by Saturn Corporation in Spring Hill, Tennessee, start with this idea. From the outset, environmental protection and natural resource conservation guided the plant's design. Because of this, the plant produces 1/5 of the wastewater generated by similar facilities. It's even exploring the possibility of creating its own wetlands to treat the wastewater. That project would reuse up to 100 million gallons a year to spray irrigate crops. But it's rare to be able to build a new factory from the ground up. What are we going to do about upgrading the vast majority of American plants, the ones that we've already got? We are beginning to use our tools in an environmentally responsible way. Tomorrow, we'll be able to do even better.
How can we test long-term impact? What may appear to be a miracle product in the short term, like CFCs for instance, can pose vast unknown threats to the world's climate cycles or food chain. When we use cars, the big issues are air pollution and energy conservation. Back in the 60s, people thought that 2-ton chrome-plated tail-finned models like these were just what everybody needed, that Americans would never move into anything different. Just goes to show how attitudes have changed.
Figuring out how cars can become more environmentally sound involves more than just the big car companies. It involves how cars are serviced and maintained as well. You make the decisions. Where you get your car repaired, what kind of car you buy. Cars like this experimental GM electric car are going to be a part of our future. Right now, these cars are not available, so we need to look at our current fuel systems and begin to take alternative fuels seriously. There are other novel ways to beat pollution. One is by staying home and getting paid to do it. AT&T recently decided to figure out how much pollution would be prevented if some of their employees telecommuted to work 1 day a week. Telecommuting is when you work at home and phone in your work using computers and fax machines. They found out that in a city like Los Angeles, telecommuting actually could save a lot of pollution, and it's pleasant too. Alternative fuels require consumer interest and support, and the same goes for alternative transportation systems and alternative energies, such as solar and wind power.
What we are getting at again is sustainable development. What is the point of high crop yields one year if the soil is depleted and drenched in pesticides as a result? We must start looking at sustainable methods, and we must look carefully and critically at long-range bioengineering in agriculture.
As employers and employees, as consumers, as citizens, as parents, each of us can act. Pollution prevention is everybody's job. The question is, will we be role models for our kids, or will they be role models for us?
Consider this. If the oceans, sky, trees, rivers, and other species could speak, what would they tell us? And can we begin to take the time to listen? When nature returns our pollution to us, in our air, in our water, in our food, do we hear the message that we're out of harmony? Would we exploit nature less, both in advertising and in fact, if we respected nature more?
How can we begin to change our everyday habits? How can we learn to look at each consumer purchase and each business choice with new eyes? More simply, let's not just think of nature as 2 weeks of vacation a year. Our first step, every morning when you wake up, picture a clean environment. And next, let's see what we can do together to realize this.